The sun hung like a copper coin in the vast, indifferent sky, pressing down on Silas with a heat that baked the dust into his very bones and made the horizon shimmer with false promise. His horse, an old roan named Juniper, moved with a weary, rhythmic sway, each hoof-fall stirring miniature clouds that powdered Silas's worn boots and the faded denim of his trousers. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months, a relentless cycle of solitary trails, meager campfires, and the gnawing quiet that burrowed deep into a man's soul until he almost forgot the sound of another's voice, let alone the warmth of a shared laugh. He rode into redemption, a name that felt like a cruel jest given the stark, sun-bleached planks of its buildings, not searching for anything as grand as salvation, but for something far simpler, something to break the endless monotony of beans and hardtack. A whisper of corn had reached him on the last trading post, a rumor of sweetness, of a brief respite from the bitter grit of his existence. He saw it then, a splash of white against the dusty browns and grays of the general store's facade, a small stand, almost humble, yet drawing his eye with an undeniable pull. A young woman stood behind it, her slender form draped in a simple white prairie dress, its fabric impossibly clean in this kingdom of dirt. Her dark hair was pulled back, escaping in soft tendrils around a face that held the delicate artistry of porcelain and the quiet strength of polished river stone. She looked no older than 25, a vibrant, unexpected bloom in this parched land, her hands, surprisingly small yet capable, tending to ears of corn piled high on a makeshift counter. An emotional question, unbidden and sharp, pierced through Silas's accustomed emotional armor. What unseen journey had brought such grace to this raw, unforgiving place? And what hidden burdens did she carry behind those serene, observant eyes? The very air around her seemed to ripple with a gentle defiance, a quiet refusal to be swallowed by the harshness that defined everything else he had known for so long. He slowed Juniper, the creak of the saddle leather the only sound in the sudden quiet of his own thoughts, and felt a strange, unsettling flutter in his chest, a sensation he hadn't acknowledged in years, a tiny spark in the deep, cold hearth of his heart, promising something that felt both fragile and immensely powerful. He had come for corn, a simple desire, but the sight of her, the unexpected vision of her quiet resilience, suggested he might have stumbled upon something far more profound, something that might even begin to mend the ragged edges of his own fractured existence, if he dared to reach for it. The sun beat down relentlessly, but for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Silas felt a prickle not just of heat, but of a strange, burgeoning hope, a warmth that started deep within and slowly, cautiously, began to spread. Silas dismounted, the leather of his boots crunching on the dry earth, each step a deliberate effort in the oppressive heat. He led Juniper by the reins, a silent, dusty sentinel beside him, toward the corn stand. The woman's eyes, the color of rich, dark earth, met his, not with apprehension, but with a gaze that was steady and discerning, acknowledging his presence without invitation or fear. He felt a rare awkwardness bloom within him, a sensation he hadn't known since he was a green boy, unaccustomed to the nuances of polite society. His usual interactions were blunt, transactional, but her quiet dignity demanded something more. "Ma'am," he managed, his voice a low rumble, rough from disuse, the single word feeling heavy in the air between them. Her lips, a soft rose against her fair skin, curved into a small, almost imperceptible smile. "Good morning, sir. Can I help you?" she asked, her voice a melodic whisper, touched with an accent that was unfamiliar to him, yet pleasing to his ear, like the distant sound of wind chimes in a quiet valley. The simple question cut through the layers of his solitude, reminding him sharply of how long it had been since someone had offered him such straightforward kindness. He gestured vaguely at the piles of corn, his gaze lingering on the vibrant green husks. "Heard tell you had the best corn this side of the territories," he offered, a small, uncharacteristic attempt at levity. She chuckled softly, a sound like dry leaves rustling in a gentle breeze, and nodded. "Some folks say that. It's fresh, at least." She picked up an ear, stripped back a small section of the husk to reveal rows of plump, golden kernels. "Sweet corn, just harvested this morning." The image of her, rising before dawn, tending to her small patch, cultivating something so delicate in this harsh land, painted itself vividly in his mind. He found himself studying her hands, the way her fingers moved with such care, a stark contrast to his own, gnarled and scarred by rope and rifle. He thought of his own past, a blur of forgotten faces, fleeting alliances, and the constant, weary flight from a world that had offered him little but sorrow and betrayal. May, as he silently decided to call her, stood as a beacon of quiet industry, a testament to enduring strength, making something beautiful and necessary out of very little. He bought half a dozen ears, handing over the few coins with a sense of ceremony he hadn't intended. Their fingers brushed as she returned his change, a jolt, subtle yet unmistakable, passing between them, a fleeting connection that surprised him with its simple, human warmth. He wanted to say more, to ask her about her journey, about the resilience that shone in her eyes, but the words caught in his throat, lost to a lifetime of silence. He merely nodded, a silent promise hanging unspoken in the simmering air, a moment of connection that was more profound than any grand declaration. The corn was warm against his palm, a tangible reminder of her presence, of a sweetness he hadn't known he craved until now. As Silas prepared to leave, a shadow fell across the corn stand, distinct from the shifting light of the high sun. A group of men, led by a portly figure with a grimace etched permanently on his face, sauntered closer, their boots kicking up dust with an air of deliberate menace. Silas recognized the leader as Jedadiah, a saloon owner known for his boisterous cruelty and his possessive grip on the town's meager offerings. Jedadiah's eyes, small and beady, swept over May with a leering contempt before settling on Silas, a challenge simmering beneath their surface. "Well, well, look what the cat dragged in," Jedadiah sneered, his voice thick with a self-important drawl. "Don't see many folks round here keen on foreign wares." May, though her posture remained straight, tensed almost imperceptibly, a subtle clenching of her jaw that Silas, ever attuned to the nuances of unspoken fear, did not miss. She averted her gaze, her silence a shield against their scorn, a quiet act of defiance that spoke volumes of her strength. Silas felt a slow, cold anger begin to unfurl in his gut, a protective instinct he hadn't realized he still possessed. He tightened his grip on Juniper's reins, his knuckles white. The air grew heavy, thick with unspoken threats and a palpable sense of social cruelty, the kind that festered in isolated towns like Redemption. Jedadiah stepped closer to May's stand, his heavy hands slamming down on the counter, rattling the ears of corn. "Heard you been overcharging folks, girl, taking advantage of honest, God-fearing men." His words were a thinly veiled accusation, baseless and cruel, designed to diminish and humiliate. May remained silent, her eyes fixed on the distant horizon, refusing to grant him the satisfaction of a reaction. This was the moment, Silas realized, the unspoken moral confrontation that had been brewing since he first saw her. To stand by was to condone, to become complicit in the fear and prejudice that haunted this place. He looked from Jedadiah's sneering face to May's stoic profile, her quiet strength shining through the thinly veiled terror, and a choice crystallized within him, stark and clear as a winter morning. He had lived a life of quiet retreat, of avoiding entanglement, but something about this woman, Her unwavering spirit in the face of such raw ugliness demanded a different path. The dust settled, the sun beat down, and in that simmering silence, the moral compass within Silas swung decisively, pointing him toward a courage he had long thought extinguished. His past had taught him to survive by fading into the shadows, but something in May's vulnerability, coupled with her profound dignity, called him forward, into the unwanted yet necessary light of confrontation. He felt the weight of his own history, a tapestry woven with threads of injustice and loss, and knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in his bones, that he could not, would not, allow this cruelty to stand unchallenged. Silas's voice, when it came, was surprisingly calm, cutting through Jedadiah's bluster like a honed blade. "She's charging a fair price, Jedadiah. Just paid it myself." The saloon owner's eyes narrowed, his jowls quivering with indignation. He hadn't expected the lonely drifter to speak up, to challenge his perceived authority. The other men, Jedadiah's usual hangers-on, shuffled their feet, sensing the shift in the dynamic. This wasn't the usual easy prey. "Mind your own business, cowboy," Jedadiah snarled, his voice rising, betraying the crack in his composure. "This ain't got nothing to do with you." Silas took a slow, deliberate step forward, placing himself almost imperceptibly between Jedadiah and May's stand. It wasn't an aggressive move, but a statement of presence, a quiet assertion of protection. "Seems to me it's about a man trying to bully a woman selling her honest wares," Silas replied, his gaze unwavering, locked with Jedadiah's. The tension in the air was palpable, stretched thin like a bowstring about to snap. May, for the first time, turned her head slightly, her dark eyes flicking to Silas, a flicker of surprise, then something akin to gratitude passing through them. Her quiet strength was not diminished by the fear, but rather amplified by her silent resolve. Jedadiah, unaccustomed to such direct challenge, faltered, his bluster giving way to a frustrated rage. He looked at Silas's lean, weathered frame, at the hand resting casually near the worn handle of his revolver, not in threat, but in a clear indication of a man who knew how to handle himself. The unspoken message was clear. This was not a man to be trifled with. Jedadiah sputtered, his face reddening. "This ain't over," he finally managed, his words a weak retreat rather than a genuine threat. He glared at May, then at Silas, before turning on his heel and stomping away, his cronies scrambling to follow, their bravado evaporating with their leader's retreat. The silence that followed was heavy, yet cleansed, like the air after a summer storm. Silas remained where he was for a moment, letting the lingering unease dissipate. He could feel May's eyes on him, a silent query, a silent offering of something fragile and new. The dusty street, the sun-baked buildings, all seemed to hold their breath, witnessing the small yet significant shift in the town's unspoken hierarchy. His choice had been made, not with a flourish or a shout, but with a quiet, resolute stand against cruelty, a simple act of human decency that felt like a seismic event in the quiet landscape of his solitary life. He had spent years avoiding trouble, burying himself in the vast empty spaces, but in that moment, for May, he had stepped out of the shadows, and in doing so, had found a part of himself he thought long lost, a quiet strength that pulsed with a renewed, vital purpose. The harsh light of the sun seemed to soften around them, bathing the corn stand in a gentle glow, a subtle visual cue to the changing emotional landscape. The departure of Jedadiah and his men left a quiet vacuum, a space filled only with the buzzing of flies and the distant creak of a wind-worn sign. Silas turned to May, a slight, almost hesitant nod. "You all right, ma'am?" he asked, his voice softer now, the edge of confrontation gone, replaced by a genuine concern that felt unfamiliar on his tongue. She met his gaze, and for the first time Silas saw the full depth of her eyes. Not just the stoic resilience, but a vulnerable tenderness that moved him profoundly. "I am, now. Thank you," she replied, her voice a whispered cadence of gratitude, her hands clasped loosely in front of her, a gesture of quiet grace. The moment stretched, thick with unspoken sentiments. He felt a rare, almost overwhelming urge to linger, to learn more about her, about the journey that had brought her to this dusty outpost, about the life she had woven for herself amidst such stark surroundings. He was a man accustomed to the brevity of encounters, to riding away before roots could form, but with May, the thought of departure felt like a betrayal, a severing of a fragile, precious thread. He felt the phantom touch of her fingers when they had brushed, the faint sweetness of the corn he held, tangible reminders of a connection that had blossomed unexpectedly from a simple transaction. The silence between them was no longer awkward, but comfortable, a shared breath of understanding that transcended words. "You travelin' far?" May asked, breaking the quiet, her voice still soft, but with a hint of curiosity that felt like an invitation. Silas hesitated, his usual answer, "Just wanderin'," suddenly feeling hollow and insufficient. He looked around the dusty town, then back at her, at the quiet strength in her eyes, the gentle curve of her lips. The vast, empty spaces he had called home for so long now felt just that, empty, lacking the warmth, the quiet dignity that radiated from her. "Don't rightly know any more," he confessed, the words raw with an honesty he rarely afforded himself, his gaze holding hers. It was an admission of his own loneliness, an unspoken plea, a vulnerable crack in the hardened shell he had built around himself. May smiled, a genuine, luminous smile that reached her eyes, transforming her face, and in that moment the parched world around them seemed to bloom with a sudden, impossible beauty. "Well, if you're not in a hurry, there's a good place by the creek, just south of town. Good water." Her voice was a low murmur, but the suggestion carried the weight of a quiet offer, a beacon in the uncertainty of his path. It was a simple statement, yet it held the promise of respite, of belonging, of a chance to finally put down roots in a world that had always demanded he keep moving. The emotional loop that had opened when he first saw her, that question of hidden burdens and enduring grace, began to close, not with grand revelations, but with the quiet dignity of a shared moment, a subtle shift in the landscape of his heart. The fear that had simmered moments before had been replaced by a fragile, burgeoning hope, a warmth that started deep within and slowly, cautiously began to spread, hinting at a future that was no longer defined by solitude, but by the quiet, powerful promise of connection. Silas watched her until the last faint outline of her white dress disappeared behind the rough-hewn timbers of the general store, the sun beating down on his bare head, yet feeling a strange coolness bloom within him. The creek south of town was exactly as she had described. Clear, cool water tumbling over smooth stones, shaded by a stand of cottonwoods that whispered ancient secrets in the gentle breeze. He unsaddled Juniper, letting the old horse drink deeply before setting up a meager camp, the routine of it automatic, yet imbued with a new, almost sacred quality. As he built his small fire, the crackle of burning kindling seemed to echo the stirrings within his own chest, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself to acknowledge in years, a feeling of being seen, truly seen, not as a drifter or a shadow, but as a man capable of standing for something. He chewed on a piece of jerky, the flavors muted against the vivid memory of May's quiet strength, the subtle curve of her smile, the melodic quality of her voice. He imagined her back in town, perhaps preparing supper, or simply resting after a long day under the relentless sun. Did she think of him? The question, fragile and hopeful, hovered in the vast expanse of his solitary night. He knew the harsh realities of this land, the way kindness could be exploited, the way hope could be crushed. But May carried herself with an air that suggested she understood these truths too, yet chose to persevere, to cultivate sweetness in a world that often yielded only bitterness. He spent the next few days in a quiet rhythm, allowing Juniper to graze, mending a tear in his saddlebag, always with one ear tuned to the distant sounds of the town, his gaze often drifting towards the direction of the corn stand. He observed the comings and goings, the usual cast of characters, and noted the lingering shadows of Jedadiah's men, their wary glances suggesting a truce, not a surrender. May, he saw, continued her work with the same quiet diligence, her white dress a beacon against the dust, her movements economical and purposeful. He saw the resilience not just in her spirit, but in the very way she carried herself, a testament to countless small battles won through sheer endurance. The long descriptive sentences he found himself forming in his mind, though unvoiced, attempted to capture the delicate interplay of light and shadow on her face, the way her hair caught the sun, the quiet dignity in her every gesture, a testament to a depth of character that drew him in with an irresistible pull. He knew the path he had walked for so long was one of solitary existence, a defense against the pain of attachment, but the memory of her eyes, full of both fear and fortitude, had cracked open something vital within him, a realization that true strength might not lie in isolation, but in the courage to connect, to protect, to simply be for another. He felt the weight of his own history, a tapestry woven with threads of injustice and loss, and knew, with a certainty that resonated deep in his bones, that he could not, would not, allow this quiet beauty to be diminished. The vast, indifferent sky, once a symbol of his endless solitude, now seemed to mirror the boundless possibilities that stretched before him, beckoning him toward a future he had never dared to dream. The following morning, a decision solidified in Silas's mind with the clear certainty of a new dawn. He packed his meager camp, leading Juniper back towards redemption, not with the aimless drift of a wanderer, but with a purpose that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. He approached May's corn stand, the sun already high, warming the dusty street. She was there, her presence a quiet anchor in the bustling, if sparse, activity of the town. Her eyes, which had been downcast as she arranged fresh ears of corn, lifted as he approached, a flicker of surprise, then a soft, welcoming light blooming within them. "Good morning, ma'am," Silas offered, his voice a little less rough today, softened by anticipation. "Thought I might offer a hand if you'd be needin' one." He gestured vaguely at the small, somewhat rickety stand, his gaze sweeping over the weathered wood. He wasn't sure what help he could offer, his skills more attuned to mending fences or breaking wild horses, but the desire to be near her, to contribute to her small world, was overwhelming. May's smile was gentle, a subtle widening of her lips that transformed her serene face. "That's kind of you, sir. It does get a little busy sometimes." She paused, her gaze thoughtful, assessing him not with suspicion, but with a quiet discernment. "My name is May." "May Lee." She offered the information simply, a gesture of trust that felt profound in its understated delivery. "Silas," he replied, the name feeling solid and real on his tongue, a name he rarely spoke aloud. He felt a warmth spread through him at the exchange of names, a foundational step in the slow, careful dance of human connection. He noticed a few loose planks on the side of her stand, a minor repair that he could easily manage. "Looks like this here could use a little tightening," he said, pointing to the offending boards. "Got a few tools in my saddlebag. Wouldn't take but a moment." May nodded, a small sigh escaping her lips, a hint of the burden she carried in maintaining everything herself. "That would be a great help, Silas. Thank you." He worked slowly, deliberately, the familiar feel of hammer and nails a comforting rhythm against the new, unfamiliar beat of his heart. As he worked, May moved about her stand, occasionally offering him a cool drink of water or a fresh ear of corn boiled to perfection, its sweetness a stark contrast to the dust and heat. They spoke in quiet murmurs, small exchanges about the weather, the quality of the harvest, the simple realities of their lives. He learned she had come from a distant land, seeking a new beginning, a quiet life free from the constraints of her past. She, in turn, listened patiently as he offered vague, generalized accounts of his years on the trail, omitting the darker, more painful details, yet feeling a profound relief in simply being able to speak, to share something of his world with her. The unspoken emotional questions that had first drawn him to her began to find tentative answers in these shared, quiet moments, weaving a deeper connection between them, a tapestry of mutual respect and burgeoning affection that promised to grow stronger with each passing day. The very air around them seemed to thicken with unspoken possibilities. Each shared glance, each soft word, a tender brushstroke on the canvas of their developing bond. Their quiet companionship at the corn stand became a daily ritual, a sanctuary amidst the harsh realities of redemption. Silas found himself anticipating the mornings, the sight of May's white dress against the sun-drenched backdrop, the gentle cadence of her voice. He helped with small repairs, fetched water, and even, to his own surprise, learned to shuck corn with a practiced ease. Their conversations deepened, moving beyond pleasantries to tentative explorations of their pasts, revealing snippets of joy and sorrow that painted a fuller picture of the resilient souls beneath their guarded exteriors. He learned of the long, arduous journey May had made, the dreams of a peaceful life that had sustained her through unimaginable hardship. She, in turn, coaxed fragments of his own story from him, the quiet tragedies that had forged his solitary path, the gnawing sense of injustice that had driven him from one lonely horizon to the next. One sweltering afternoon, as the town simmered under a merciless sun, a wagon rumbled into Redemption, a dust-caked conveyance piled high with crates. It stopped abruptly near the general store, not far from May's stand. Out stepped Jedadiah, his face a mask of smug satisfaction, accompanied by two new, hulking figures Silas hadn't seen before. They began to unload barrels of what appeared to be new stock, but as they worked, Jedadiah's eyes kept darting to May, a predatory gleam in their depths. He approached her stand, his heavy boots kicking up dust, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Heard you been doing good business, May Lee," he drawled, his voice thick with false cordiality, yet laced with an undeniable threat. "Pity that. Some folks just ain't meant for prosperity in these parts." One of the men accompanying him ostentatiously began setting up a rival corn stand directly across the street, a crude, hastily constructed table laden with wilted, inferior ears. It was a direct act of aggression, a blatant attempt to undercut her, to drive her out of business. May's face, usually so serene, tightened visibly, a flash of fear, quickly masked by her customary quiet defiance passing through her eyes. She looked at the inferior corn, then back at Jedadiah, her lips pressed into a thin line. The humiliation was public, deliberate, and designed to break her spirit. Silas felt the familiar cold fire ignite in his gut, the protective instinct surging forward, stronger than ever before. He stepped forward, placing himself once again between May and Jedadiah, his presence a silent shield. "She's got a right to her livin', Jedadiah," Silas stated, his voice low, controlled, but carrying an undeniable edge of warning. Jedadiah merely sneered, his eyes flicking to Silas with contempt. "This ain't your fight, cowboy, unless you want to get yourself wrapped up in something you can't handle." The implication hung heavy in the air, a clear threat to both May and Silas. The choice before Silas was stark: retreat to his solitary existence, or stand with May, risking everything against a man who wielded petty power with cruel abandon. But looking at May, at the unwavering resolve in her eyes despite the palpable fear, Silas knew there was no choice. He had found something worth fighting for, a quiet grace in a harsh world, and he would not, could not, let it be extinguished. The stakes were no longer just about corn, but about dignity, about justice, about the very foundation of the fragile hope they had begun to build together, a small yet profound act of defiance against the crushing weight of injustice. The standoff intensified, the midday sun glinting off the metal buckles of Jedadiah's men, reflecting the simmering hostility in the air. Silas, however, did not raise his voice or reach for his weapon. Instead, he turned his back to Jedadiah, a deliberate act of dismissal that spoke volumes, and picked up a fresh ear of May's corn. He pulled back the husk, revealing the plump, golden kernels, then took a slow, deliberate bite, savoring the sweetness. "Real corn," he stated, his voice loud enough for Jedadiah and his men to hear, but directed only at May, a quiet validation of her honest work. "Sweetest I've tasted in years." The simple act, utterly devoid of theatrics, was more effective than any shouted threat. It underscored Jedadiah's petty cruelty by highlighting the genuine quality of May's product, contrasting it sharply with the wilted, unappealing ears at his hastily erected stand. A few townsfolk who had been lingering nervously at the edges of the confrontation began to drift closer to May's stand, their curiosity piqued. A young woman, her face smudged with flour, hesitantly approached. "Is it really that good?" she asked May, her voice soft. May, emboldened by Silas's quiet stand, offered her a freshly boiled ear. "Taste for yourself," she said, her voice steady. The woman took a bite, her eyes widening. "Oh, it is! Nothing like the slop Jedadiah sells." Her words, spoken with simple honesty, rippled through the small crowd that had gathered. Jedadiah's face purpled with rage. He had sought to humiliate May, to crush her spirit, but Silas's understated defiance and May's quiet dignity had turned the tables. His crude attempt at sabotage had backfired, exposing his own meanness to the scrutiny of the community. "This ain't over," Jedadiah snarled, but his voice lacked conviction, his usual bluster deflated by the unexpected turn of events. He cast a venomous glare at Silas, then at May, before stomping back to his wagon, leaving his inferior corn stand to wither in the sun. His men, sheepish and defeated, followed, leaving a defeated quiet in their wake. The immediate crisis had passed, not with a burst of violence, but with the quiet triumph of integrity. May looked at Silas, her eyes shining with a mixture of relief, gratitude, and a depth of emotion that needed no words. He saw in her gaze a reflection of his own burgeoning feelings, a silent acknowledgment of the bond that had solidified between them in the face of adversity. The town, for its part, seemed to exhale, a palpable sense of relief settling over the dusty street. The moral confrontation had been met, not with grand gestures, but with small, deliberate choices that had shifted the balance of power, not through dominance, but through a quiet, unyielding dignity that resonated deeply within the collective consciousness of the community. In the quiet aftermath, a sense of earned safety settled around May and Silas, a fragile yet profound triumph that promised a future where their shared resilience could flourish against the harsh backdrop of the unforgiving frontier. In the days and weeks that followed, the presence of Jedadiah's wilted corn stand across the street served as a stark, ironic monument to his failed cruelty. It slowly disintegrated under the relentless sun, a visual cue to the shifting power dynamics in redemption. May's business, far from being ruined, thrived. The townsfolk, witnessing Silas's unwavering stand and May's quiet fortitude, gravitated to her stand, not just for the superior corn, but for the unspoken sense of justice and decency she represented. The shy woman with the flour-dusted face became a regular, often bringing friends, their loyalty a testament to the unexpected moral reversal that had occurred. Silas, no longer just a transient cowboy, found himself woven into the fabric of May's life, and by extension, into the nascent community she had cultivated around her. He still camped by the creek, but his mornings began earlier, his steps directed towards her stand. He repaired the leaky roof of her small storage shed, reinforced the stand itself, and even helped her expand her small cornfield just outside of town, his hands, once calloused from reins and rope, now deftly tilling the soil. They spoke less of their pasts and more of their future, their conversations infused with a quiet hope that felt both fragile and immensely powerful. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, They sat on the small, worn porch of May's humble dwelling behind the general store. The air was soft, carrying the scent of damp earth and the faint sweetness of corn. May leaned her head against his shoulder, a small, tender gesture that spoke volumes. "I never thought I would find a home here, Silas," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the chirping crickets. "Or someone who understood." Silas wrapped an arm around her, the warmth of her presence a balm to his long, lonely soul. "Me neither, May," he confessed, his voice rough with emotion. "Never rightly thought I'd find anything but the next horizon." Their shared silence was not empty, but full, brimming with the unspoken promises of a love that had bloomed in the most unlikely of places, nurtured by shared hardship and quiet courage. The small domestic details of their growing life together, the sturdy stand, the thriving field, the shared meals, the silent understanding that passed between them, became symbols of their earned dignity, their hard-won survival. The emotional loops that had opened with Silas's arrival, the questions of vulnerability and belonging, were slowly, steadily closing, replaced by a profound sense of peace and an unwavering belief in the resilience of the human heart. The romance, a slow-burn narrative woven into the harsh frontier, had ripened into something real, grounded, and deeply affecting, a testament to the transformative power of connection in a world that often sought to isolate and diminish. Their individual battles against loss and injustice had converged, finding a quiet triumph in the shared sanctuary they had built, a sanctuary that resonated with the promise of a peaceful, shared existence under the vast, forgiving sky. Years blurred into a gentle, enduring rhythm, a testament to the quiet, resilient love that had taken root in the dusty heart of redemption. The small corn stand, once a solitary beacon of May's hope, had blossomed into a thriving market stall, offering not just corn, but dried herbs, carefully woven baskets, and other necessities, all cultivated or crafted with May's meticulous care. Silas, no longer the lonely cowboy, had found his true calling alongside her. He had traded his solitary wanderings for the steady, satisfying work of building a life, tending their expanding garden, mending fences, and ensuring the safety of their small, hard-won sanctuary. His days were filled with purpose, his nights with the quiet comfort of May's presence, the warmth of her hand in his. Their modest home, once a rough cabin, had been slowly, lovingly expanded, each plank and nail a testament to their shared future. It boasted a small, well-tended porch where they would often sit in the evenings, watching the sun set, the golden light painting the familiar landscape with ever-new beauty. The town of Redemption, too, had changed, subtly but profoundly. Jedadiah, diminished by his public defeat and the unwavering loyalty of the townsfolk to May, had eventually sold his saloon and moved on, his brand of petty cruelty finding no purchase against the quiet dignity that Silas and May embodied. The air in Redemption felt lighter, imbued with a nascent sense of community, a spirit of mutual respect that had been nurtured by the example of their quiet defiance. Children, once wary of the foreign woman, now flocked to May's stall, drawn by her gentle nature and the sweet treats she sometimes offered. They would often see Silas nearby, his weathered face softened by a smile, a silent guardian of the peace they had built. The narrative, which began with vulnerability and fear, had blossomed into earned safety, belonging, and a quiet triumph that resonated far beyond the confines of their small world. Their love story, a slow-burn romance born of shared hardship and unwavering resilience, had become a legend whispered among the newer settlers, a testament to the power of human connection in the face of an unforgiving frontier. On one particularly warm summer evening, as the first stars began to prick the velvet sky, May leaned her head against Silas's shoulder, a contented sigh escaping her lips. He brushed a stray tendril of dark hair from her face, his gaze filled with an enduring tenderness. "We made it, May," he murmured, the words simple yet profound, encompassing a lifetime of struggle and hard-won peace. She looked up at him, her eyes mirroring the starlight, a universe of love and gratitude shining within them. "We did, Silas," she affirmed, her voice a soft, melodic whisper, a promise of countless shared dawns and peaceful dusks to come. The long, descriptive sentences of their lives, once filled with the harsh realities of survival, now flowed with the gentle rhythm of enduring love, a testament to the profound power of two souls finding solace and strength in each other, building a legacy of quiet resilience under the vast, boundless sky.